We've all experienced it, the desire to learn something new, to improve ourselves, to acquire a new skill that could change our lives. The excitement is there, the curiosity burns bright, yet somehow, we never quite manage to take that first step. We find ourselves making excuses, telling ourselves we'll start tomorrow, next week, or when we feel ready, but before we know it, weeks or even months have passed, and we haven't made any real progress. It's easy to assume that this struggle comes down to a lack of motivation or discipline. Maybe we think we just don't have enough willpower or that we're inherently lazy. But what if the real problem isn't about willpower at all? What if the reason learning feels so difficult isn't because we're unmotivated, but because we misunderstand how our brains respond to learning itself? What if the frustration, procrastination, and avoidance we experience are actually built into the process of acquiring new skills? Understanding this can change everything. It can help us break free from the mental barriers that hold us back, making learning feel easier, more natural, and even enjoyable. The key isn't to wait for motivation to magically appear. The key is to understand why we struggle in the first place, and then use that knowledge to work with our brains, not against them. When you set out to learn something new, you might expect the process to feel exciting or inspiring, and sometimes it is. But more often than not, the initial feeling is discomfort. What many people don't realize is that this discomfort isn't just a mental block or laziness. It's a biological response. The act of learning, whether it's mastering a new skill, understanding a complex concept, or picking up a creative hobby, actually triggers the same areas of your brain that are responsible for physical pain. Yes, you read that right. The reason learning feels hard at first is because, on a neurological level, your brain perceives it as a kind of threat. New information, unfamiliar processes, and the possibility of failure create mental resistance. This is why the thought of starting something new can induce anxiety or avoidance. It's as though your brain is telling you, this could hurt, and because humans are wired to avoid pain, we instinctively turn to distractions that are easier and more comforting, whether it's scrolling through social media, watching TV, or doing anything other than the task we know we should be doing. But here's the fascinating part. This mental pain is temporary. The hardest part of learning isn't the learning itself, it's starting. The anticipation of the effort is often more uncomfortable than the effort itself. Once you push through that initial resistance, something remarkable happens. The discomfort begins to fade. Your brain adjusts, and instead of perceiving the task as a threat, it starts to engage with it. You enter what's known as the learning zone, where focus deepens and the anxiety that once seemed overwhelming melts away. So, what's the solution to this initial resistance? It's deceptively simple. Just start. This advice might sound frustratingly obvious, but its simplicity is what makes it powerful. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment, the right mood, or a surge of motivation to begin. In fact, waiting for those things often guarantees you'll never start at all. The trick is to take one small action, just enough to break through that wall of avoidance. Open the book, launch the app, pick up the instrument, or write the first sentence. Once you're in motion, the mental friction eases, and you find yourself doing the thing that moments ago felt impossible. Think of it like jumping into a cold pool. The first few seconds are uncomfortable, your body resists, your mind screams for you to get out. But if you stay in, your body acclimates. Soon, the water feels fine, even refreshing. Learning works the same way. The initial mental coldness gives way to a state of engagement, and with repeated exposure, the process becomes easier. You start to trust that the discomfort is temporary, and this trust makes it easier to push through the next time. What's more, every time you overcome that resistance, you're training your brain not just to learn new information, but to become more resilient. You're building a habit of taking initiative, of showing up even when it's uncomfortable. And the more you do this, the less intimidating learning becomes. Over time, you start to associate learning not with pain, but with progress. Of course, this doesn't mean the journey is without challenges. Even after you've started, there will be moments when you feel stuck, frustrated, or tempted to give up. Maybe the material is more difficult than you expected, or you hit a plateau where progress seems to stall. When that happens, your brain will try to steer you toward something easier, something that offers quick gratification, like checking your phone or watching a video. This is completely natural. Our brains are wired to seek short-term rewards over long-term gains, but the solution is the same. Start again. Return to the task, even if it feels unpleasant. Remind yourself that the discomfort is a sign that you're stretching your mind, building new neural connections, and doing something that will lead to long-term satisfaction. The ability to return to work, even after a distraction or setback, is what separates people who master new skills from those who never get past the starting line. Another important thing to understand about learning is that your brain has virtually unlimited capacity for new information. A common fear people have is that they won't be able to retain what they learned, that their brain will fill up, or that they'll forget everything. But that's not how memory works. When you learn something new, your brain forms new synapses, connections between neurons. The more you use those connections, the stronger they become. And there's no upper limit to how many new connections your brain can create. That said, your brain does need time to process and consolidate new information, which is why rest is essential. You can't just cram endlessly and expect everything to stick. Sleep plays a huge role in learning. During sleep, your brain strengthens the neural pathways formed during the day and clears out metabolic waste that could interfere with memory. Skimping on sleep doesn't just make you tired. It actively hampers your ability to learn. Physical activity and social interaction also help. Exercise promotes the growth of new brain cells, while meaningful conversations stimulate cognitive flexibility and emotional well-being. Staying isolated or sedentary, on the other hand, makes learning harder and increases the risk of mental fatigue or even depression. So, if you want to learn effectively, don't think of it as just studying harder. Think of it as supporting your brain with rest, movement, and connection. It's also worth understanding the two modes of thinking that your brain switches between: focused mode and diffuse mode. The focused mode is what you use when you're actively concentrating, solving problems, or trying to grasp a new concept. It's intense, efficient, and necessary for deep learning, but it can't be sustained indefinitely. The diffuse mode, on the other hand, is what your brain switches to when you relax, daydream, or take a walk. This mode allows your mind to make unexpected connections, process information in the background, and often leads to those aha moments when a solution suddenly becomes clear. The key to effective learning is to alternate between these two modes. Focus deeply for a while, then step away and let your mind wander. This back and forth creates a powerful rhythm that helps you retain what you've learned and approach challenges with fresh insight. In the end, learning isn't about being constantly motivated or having a perfect plan. It's about understanding your brain, recognizing that the initial resistance is normal, that the discomfort will pass, and that taking the first step is always the hardest part. Once you start, the momentum builds. And as you build that momentum, You create a new mental narrative, one where learning isn't something to fear or avoid, but something that leads to growth, confidence, and long-term satisfaction. However, even once you've started, new hurdles will emerge. You might find yourself distracted, your focus broken by frustrations, setbacks, or the temptation to give up. Our brains are wired to seek instant rewards, so when we don't see immediate results from the hard work we put in, it's easy to look for a shortcut, something quick and pleasurable, like scrolling through social media or binge-watching TV shows. But if you want real growth and satisfaction, you have to keep your eyes on the long-term rewards. Learning is not a race, and it doesn't come with instant gratification. It's a long-term investment in your future self. The real reward comes when you can look back and realize how far you've come, not from the small, fleeting pleasures you chase in the moment. Let's get to the science behind learning. When you learn something new, your brain forms new connections, called synapses. It's like creating new pathways in your brain, which is why there's no limit to how much you can learn. Your brain is constantly reshaping itself in response to the new knowledge you absorb. But this doesn't happen all at once. You can't cram everything into your brain in a single sitting. Your brain needs time to process and absorb information, which is why rest is just as important as active learning. Think of learning like a muscle. The more you practice, the stronger the connections in your brain become. And just like building muscles, this process requires repetition. The key to retaining information is not just studying something once and moving on. It's about revisiting it, reinforcing those pathways, and ensuring that they're solidified. This is why we forget things from time to time. Our brain naturally prioritizes the information it deems most important. If you've forgotten something, it's likely because you haven't had a reason to keep it top of mind. Let's take drawing, for example. Instead of trying to tackle everything at once, anatomy, perspective, shading, and color theory, focus on one thing at a time. Identify where you're struggling the most and start from there. Once you focus on a specific area, you create a need to learn it, and that need propels you forward. And here's the secret. Learning doesn't always happen in a straight line. There's no need to study a book from cover to cover. Instead, look for the parts that are relevant to you at the moment. Don't be afraid to come back to sections you skipped earlier when you feel ready. But above all, the most powerful tool in your learning arsenal is sleep. It's not just important, it's absolutely vital. Sleep plays a critical role in cementing the connections your brain has made. It consolidates your memories and helps your brain clean up and reset, making room for new information. Without adequate sleep, your brain can't function at its best. Physical exercise and social interaction are also key players in this process. Regular exercise encourages the growth of new neurons, while socializing helps to keep your mind sharp. Simply put, taking care of your body and connecting with others directly supports your ability to learn. Now, let's talk about focus. There are two primary modes of thinking, the focused mode and the diffuse mode. The focused mode is all about concentration, logic, and the left side of your brain. It's where you're actively trying to absorb and process new information. But this mode requires complete focus, no distractions allowed. On the other hand, the diffuse mode is when your mind is free to wander. It's the creative, relaxed mode of thinking, where connections happen without you forcing them. This is often where your best ideas come from. For maximum efficiency, you need to understand when to switch between these modes. When you're learning something new, focus is key. But when you're reinforcing what you've already learned, It's okay to let your mind wander a bit, listening to music or watching videos in the background. Your brain will continue processing even when you're not actively concentrating. One of the most critical points in learning is realizing that you have to take action yourself. Watching someone else paint, draw, or create might inspire you, but it won't teach you the skills. Learning is about problem solving, and the only way to solve those problems is to tackle them yourself. Sometimes learning something new can feel so foreign that you can't relate to it at all. It's abstract, and no matter how hard you try, it just doesn't make sense. In these cases, don't just memorize definitions or categories. Try to understand it in a way that connects to your own experiences. Make it real. If you're learning to draw an eye, for instance, think of it as a marble covered by skin, and try to understand how the eyelid works in relation to the eyeball. Or when learning to draw a figure, think about the weight and balance of the body. Don't just memorize the positions, but feel them in your own body. The key to learning anything that's tough is to focus on the big picture. Don't get bogged down in every little detail. The more abstract and difficult the concept, the more important it is to break it down into something you can understand. As you master the basics, your brain will naturally begin to make connections to more complicated ideas. Another powerful technique for improving memory is self-testing. Try to recall what you've learned, test yourself, and see where you're missing information. When you notice gaps, go back and study those areas. There's no shame in not knowing everything. Mistakes are an essential part of the learning process. The real danger for creative people is that they rely too much on their intuition. You might think you're improving by drawing from memory, but in reality, you may not be mastering the fundamentals. Your intuition can be misleading, and while it's important, it should not replace deliberate practice. Focused, intentional practice is what leads to true mastery. Lastly, remember that learning is not a sprint. It's a marathon. Your brain can't handle everything all at once. Mix up your study routine, alternate between topics, and give yourself time to process what you've learned. Spacing out your practice sessions allows your brain to consolidate what you've learned and makes it easier to retain new information. Procrastination is normal. It's hard to face something new, especially when it feels overwhelming. But you don't need to figure it all out at once. Start small. Take one step. You don't need to be an expert right away. Just open the software, try out an instrument, or learn a basic technique. The more you do, the more the initial discomfort will fade. You'll develop the habit of taking action, and eventually, the progress you make will be its own reward. At the end of the day, learning is about taking initiative. It's about committing to the process and understanding that the effort you put in today will pay off in the long run. You don't need to be a genius. You just need to start. So, take the first step, and remember that the only way to fail is by not trying at all.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.